It's Netanyahu and Trump, so we really can't predict much. Trump, of course, is someone who is always flip flopping. He is from my understanding, he has a very weak personality. He's easily persuaded to move in different directions. We discussed this before, but when he first returned to office, he had an opportunity to end the Ukraine war. He could have ended it immediately. He spoke about it before during the campaign, but he didn't. And I think that just shows how weak he was, even when he had a mandate, when he had popular support, when he was on a uh, when he was being supported by a strong majority of Americans. He won uh, the swing states. He had an absolute majority, but he failed. So I think that was a sign of things to come. And Netanyahu, of course, is a person who needs to stay in power. Him and his wife, who is also a very powerful figure inside Zionist circles. And so he needs he needs crises. And but the road ahead is difficult. Lebanon, Hezbollah has prepared itself for the last year. And the world really, I don't think, uh, is going to tolerate the Israeli regime anymore. People hate it across the world. Popular opinion, even in the West, has turned against the regime, especially the United States, which is more important than anywhere else. So another war, I don't think, is something that will be welcome and anywhere except for among Zionists and neocons and Christian Zionists who tell us that Jesus supports genocide. That at least their Jesus does, not the Jesus that the rest of the Christian world and Muslims know, who is would be fully against genocide and against injustice. But in any case, um, war with Iran too would face even worse consequences because the Iranians have prepared themselves. They've been doing a lot of work in the last few months to strengthen their defense capability and their offensive capabilities. So there is a war going on. In fact, President Pezeshkian said that the United States, the West, are waging a full scale war against us and the Israeli regime. It's economic warfare. They're trying to always cause internal strife. Um, that is going to continue. But whether the Netanyahu gets permission from Washington or gets support from Washington to do anything big, that remains to be seen. But again, it's not a good time for the regime because people have been watching over 2 years of genocide, and they've come to see it as genocide, which is very, very important. And so if he restarts some, even though it's not stopped, I mean, he's killing Gazans on a daily basis, children. Lebanon, he's killing people. Nothing has really stopped. The ethnic cleansing in the West Bank continues. Teenagers in the West Bank are being killed. But if he expands the war again into a major crisis, the world, I don't think, is going to. I don't think it's going to end well for him or the regime.
Well, I was reading today in the Times of Israel that the message of Netanyahu to Trump was that Trump could either be remembered for rescuing the hostages and destroying Hamas, or he could be remembered for being outsmarted or outwit by Hamas and then setting the stage for a future conflict and other bloodshed over Gaza. So so it does seem, yeah, as you were saying, that if he is weak, and you have to be weak, I guess, by definition, to fall for this kind of manipulation, because he knows why Netanyahu is arriving. He's there to sell war in Gaza, Lebanon, and of course against Iran. But it is interesting that in all of these conflicts, it does appear that there's no actual push for any peace, unless peace is traditionally defined as reducing the conflict or assessing mutual security concerns, seeking compromise, So how can these different peoples live side by side? That doesn't seem to be a very common theme. Instead, it goes back to, well, we'll have peace when evil has been defeated. Um, this is so essentially, yeah, war is peace. Do you think the U.S. though has appetite for any of this at the moment, because they're having a lot of economic problems building up, and as you suggested, Trump can play the mediator and the peacemaker in Ukraine, but it's 1 year into his administration, and the U.S. is still deeply involved in this. That is, the weapons are American, the intelligence is American, Americans are still engaged in the war planning. This is their financing. This is that that he can stand there and be the man of peace all he wants, but not that much has changed. Of course, he ruined a lot of the relationship with the West, but no, sorry, the Europeans. But beyond this, it doesn't seem like the U.S. has scaled back significantly at all. But given the difficult times of the U.S., how much willingness do you think there is in Washington these days for escalating all of these wars?
Well, I agree completely, and I think war is possible despite all you say, but there's a very strong case to be made against war. One is that the United States has deployed its navy, or big segment of its navy, off the coast of Venezuela, and you know they have so many commitments across the world, including now in Venezuela, that they're not going to be able to focus on West Asia. Also, you have the economic situation, which is getting worse in the United States. It's getting worse everywhere, I assume. But in any case, the United States is heading towards a major problem, as some are predicting. It's getting more difficult, and a lot of people are talking about, they're giving up on MAGA and speaking about America first, meaning and the wars. And this is not going to go down well with that group of people. It's obvious that Trump has a certain segment of society that will stick with him, even if it's found out that he was doing something illegal with Jeffrey Epstein. Even if there's firm evidence, I think there's going to be a percentage that will stick with him. But um, a lot of people, a significant segment of his supporters, are disillusioned, and if he goes to war, it's going to become even worse. And then there's the issue of the war with Iran, that they, the Americans and the Israelis, didn't win. And so what happens next time round? Iran is going to be more prepared than before, and the Israelis are going to be hit even harder. Lebanon is a major commitment, and Hezbollah is preparing itself for more, let's say, the future wars, the more modern wars, uh, the high tech wars. And if the Israeli regime wants to enter Lebanon, or if they want to fight, then they're going to have to deal with that as well. And then you have Ukraine, which is heading towards a sort of climax of sorts. The Russians are making great headway, and at some point, if the defenses in Ukraine collapse, that could get very messy. So you have and then you have the Chinese, who are carrying out major maneuvers near Taiwan, and the Americans, if they're going to get into another conflict, I don't think it's going to end well. But then again, you have the I have no doubt it won't end well for them or the Israelis. But then again, you have Trump, and uh, we wake up one morning and we hear he's bombed Nigeria. You wake up the next morning and he's bombed another, probably, fishing boat somewhere in the Caribbean. Uh, Nothing is for sure. He carried out negotiations with Iran, and then it became, at the beginning, the Americans were, uh, Witkoff was saying one thing, and then they moved the goalposts, and then it turned out that the whole time they were actually conspiring to carry out an attack on Iran. So it's really impossible to be certain about anything. And that is probably why what the Iranians are doing and what Hezbollah is doing and what the resistance is doing is that they're preparing themselves for the worst. What as we're speaking, it's recorded, of course. So as we're speaking, there's a major statement coming out of Gaza too from Hamas, and I don't know. We don't know what it is because it's happening as we're speaking. But the point is that the resistance in Gaza hasn't ended, and there's no doubt that Hamas is preparing itself for the days and weeks and months ahead. And if the Israeli regime wants to get involved in Lebanon, well, then that gives Hamas and its allies, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the opportunity to inflict more harm on the Israeli regime. It's impossible really for me to say because if the the regime, the Israeli regime by nature is not a regime that is able to have peace because it sees Palestinians as Amalek. It sees them as inferior. If we go back to the South African uh, complaint to the International Court of Justice, that was about 2 years ago. They gathered, and it's online. I mean, I'm sure you've read it, but if people want to reread it, or for younger people want to take a look, the intention for genocide was written, was there. I mean, they published statements made by the prime minister of the regime, the president of the regime, that the defense minister, parliamentary, Knesset members, senior government ministers who had the intention to carry out genocide. So this is not a situation. Why? Because they saw the Palestinians and they see them as subhuman. So as long as you have Palestinians in the West Bank, as long as you have Palestinians in Gaza, as long as you have Palestinians who've accepted Israeli citizenship, which are about 20% of the population of the regime itself, then I don't see how there can be peace.